We now have the pleasure of being joined by Bill Roth, Virginia Tech football play-by-play broadcaster, and of course, WAER Hall of Famer. Bill, how's the season going so far with VT?
It's been a very good October. It didn't get off to a great start for this team, candidly, in September, but they've played well the last 4 weeks. The game at Miami, which they didn't win, although most Virginia Tech fans would say, well, they actually did win that one. And then the 3 games since, they've played really well, good physical defense, and they've been opportunistic offensively. And that's the team that we thought, really going back to the Miami game, that's the team we thought we'd have coming out of preseason camp.
Yeah, going back to the beginning of the year, I guess. What happened in the preseason expectations, or some people were thinking Virginia had a chance to potentially be a sneak-in college football playoff team based on the schedule and returning talent. I guess kind of what happened in the beginning of the year and how have they corrected that the last couple of games
Well,
down the stretch?
yeah, I think on opening day, I think Vanderbilt kind of got us by surprise, and they got Alabama by surprise, and they almost got Texas by surprise, right? And that actually wouldn't have been a surprise at that point. I think that was turned out to be a very, very challenging opening game for the Hokies, and uh, they lost in overtime. It was a game that should not have gone to overtime and only went to OT because Virginia Tech got penalized for having 2 players with the same number on the field, which led to 3 points for Vanderbilt. So that's a tough one to swallow if you're a fan. And then they didn't play great in against Rutgers, which is another, and that was at home. That was another head scratcher for Virginia Tech coaches, fans, and players. I think early in the year they did not get consistent quarterback play from Drones. In the last 5 or 6 weeks, he's looked better. Although in the Georgia Tech game, it didn't appear that way, at least statistically, because it was just such a defensive game. But I think early in the season, that's a long answer to your question. I think Vanderbilt caught them by surprise a little bit, and they didn't get good quarterback play, consistent quarterback play in September.
So now, what about the current VT squad, where they are in the schedule right now on a 3-game winning streak? How much confidence do you think that Miami game, even though it was a defeat, they still played one of the best teams in the country pretty close? Did that give them a good confidence shot to get on this win streak?
I think it did. I thought that, they ran for over 200 yards against Miami. They knocked them around pretty good on their home field. Miami had to make some heroic fourth down, amazing miracle plays just to stay in the game. Hokies had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter with a chance to add to it and didn't. And had they scored, one more field goal in the third quarter going into the fourth, they're up by 3 scores potentially, and they win the game, and they're 4-0 in the league, and it's a much different thing. So, yes, to answer your question, I think the way they played at Miami certainly gave them a lot of confidence, and you saw that carry over the last 3 games.
I'm kind of interested. Take me back to that Miami game when you're calling it. What's going through your mind on that last play and everything that kind of ensued after that?
Well, Miami made a great comeback in the last 7 minutes to retake the lead in the fourth quarter. And then on the game's final drive, Tech wasn't super efficient getting down the field, but they got down to about the 35-yard line. This wasn't like, the Washington Commanders game in terms of like a 70-yard Hail Mary. I think the line of scrimmage was the 32-yard line. So it's not a desperation heave. I thought Drones made a good pass. What happened in the back of the end zone depends if you're looking at the game through Virginia Tech lenses or Miami lenses. Did he catch the ball? Everyone says yes. They took the touchdown away because they said a Miami player who was sitting out of bounds touched the ball while Quan Felton was bobbling it. It took them nearly 6 minutes in the replay room to come up with that. And it seems to go against everything. The call on the field was a touchdown. The scoreboard had Tech winning. Virginia Tech players stormed the field. You just assumed they can't overturn it without conclusive video evidence, but they did. They did overturn it, and it even after our coaching staff and Coach Pry visited with the ACC supervisor of officials, he wasn't comfortable with the explanation. And if it's conclusive, that's one thing. But if it's not, how can you overturn it? I think that is the question. But to their credit, since that, that could have been like a season crusher. That could have been the guys look back at that. They haven't lost since. So I think that Pride did a really good job of saying, if you dudes want another shot at Miami and Charlotte, if you want to play them again, which they really do, by the way, if you want to play them again, you're going to have to win out. And they've done that. Now they got some guys banged up this week going into the game, and running the table, winning 7 in a row in our league is going to be tough, obviously. But they've got 3 wins in a row, and they're hungry to see the Canes again. I will say that. Now whether that will happen, I don't know. They're going to need some help too, because SMU and Pitt are in the mix. But that's kind of what they want. They want another shot at Miami.
I want to talk about a guy that you mentioned, Virginia Tech's quarterback, Kyron Drones. He's had a pretty good year. Statistically, the numbers aren't great, but how do you assess his season thus far?
I think at times he's been really good. We've seen the drones from a year ago. They've not been very good on the deep ball this year, which is really surprising because they were very good on it last year, and they've got the same players. And they were very much a big play team last year. Lots of home runs, so to speak. And that hasn't happened this year. And that's curious, right? Because it's the same personnel. But they've been a really good running team. And when Drones is running the ball, it gives them not only Tootin, who's such a terrific back, it gives them a second running back, in essence, back there in Kyron Drones. And he's a big old guy. He's like, I call him Texas Stallion. He's from down there, but he's hard to bring down. He's big. He's a 6'3" guy, can really run, and he's hard to tackle.
Yeah, you mentioned the running game. Bayshore 250 yards away from 1,000, had over 200 again at Boston College. The Hokies 4-2 when they rush for at least 100. How lethal is that combination of Bayshore Tune, who's a great running back in his own right, and then adding Kyron Drones, who can run as a quarterback as well?
Yeah, the problem with this week's game is, Tootin got banged up at the end of the Georgia Tech game, and he's probable for Saturday. That's the official line, and he clearly is Tech's best offensive player. He's got 14 touchdowns on the year. He leads the ACC in not only touchdowns but broken tackles as well. He's really hard to bring down. I think he's probably as good as any running back the Hokies have probably had in the last 10 years. He's not the biggest guy in the world. I think that's probably why he ended up at a FCS school coming out of high school instead of a Power 4 type of scholarship offer list. But his skill set translates clearly to this level, and visiting with some NFL scouts that have seen our games and our practices, they like him at the next level too. So if he stays healthy, he's a real weapon for the Hokies.
And then you mentioned, he's the real offensive prowess, but you also touched on those receivers. I was kind of curious, do you have you pinpointed a reason why this receiving core for Virginia Tech struggled? Because there's no receiver that I think is over 2 touchdowns on the year.
Jennings, who came into last year as the big play receiver, got hurt last year, and he's been bugged all this year as well. Felton has been, I would say, 3 or 4 times running behind the defense, and Drones has missed him. And I think that hurt the Hokies against Rutgers. Rutgers defensively played Virginia Tech, much like Pitt played Syracuse. They played a lot of man-to-man, and they said, take your shots deep. And Tech could never hit them. Unlike your all's game up at Pitt, there weren't interceptions, but Kyron just overthrew Felton. And that game could have been so much differently because Felton can fly. He's probably a pro, and Kyron just missed him. But that was early in the season. So that's the answer to your question. They've had opportunities. They've just missed.
Yeah, I watched the entire game of Rutgers Virginia Tech, being a Rutgers fan, and that was just a grinded out kind of game, which is how Rutgers likes it, to be honest, given their team. But they did miss a couple shots down deep. Something that's been really good on Virginia Tech's defense, once again, the pass rush from Antoine Powell-Ryland, one of the best pass rushers in the country. How much does he impact that defense, and how does it allow kind of the defensive coordinator to run different schemes when you have such a dominant pass rusher on the edge?
Yeah, he's really dynamite. So if you don't know, we call him APR, Antoine Powell-Ryland. It's just easier. He went to Florida out of high school. He's from Virginia, but he signed with the Gators. He played there. And then when Florida made a coaching change a couple of years ago, they went from a 4-3 to a 3-4, and he wasn't a linebacker. So he transferred to Tech, which was great. My favorite stat heading into November, since leaving Florida and coming to Virginia Tech, APR has more sacks than the entire Florida Gators football team. So we're glad he's wearing orange and maroon, not orange and blue. He's a really good player, and he's got a lot of moves. He can spin. He's twitchy, as the coaches like to say. He's got a high motor, another coaching axiom, so to speak. He's a really good player. And you throw Peebles in there, who was an All ACC defensive lineman at Duke last year. You've got two real good defensive linemen, and last week in Virginia Tech's game against Georgia Tech, you saw Wilfred Panay come up with 5 tackles and a sack, and he was good as well. So up front, Tech's really good. That it's the same defensive line that SU saw last year at Lane Stadium, which they played. The Hokies defensive line played really well in that game. It's essentially the same guys. Plus, they've added Peoples to the mix down there.
Now, one of the different things that Virginia Tech is going to have to go up against is a different kind of Syracuse offense this time around, led by Kyle McCord, one of the top 5 offenses in the ACC with passing yards. Of course, they had a really bad game against Pitt, but will Virginia Tech be able to handle an offense like Kyle McCord and a quarterback who can throw the ball deep?
Yeah, we'll find out. Last week, Georgia Tech ran 80 plays, which is a lot, but didn't throw it much. They just pounded it. This week will be the opposite, and how Tech responds to that will be a real challenge, not only for the pass rush, but also for the secondary. Hokies have a couple of really good corners, but SU does a good job until the Pitt game. SU does a really good job of identifying weaknesses in the defense and exploiting that. And I think that everyone expects McCord to play better for a couple of reasons. Well, number one, it'd be hard to play worse. But number two, the kind of guy he is, right? I mean, anyone who's a competitor who has a game like that is going to come back to show everyone that wasn't me. I can be better. And no matter how well the Hokies prepare for this game, the most focused dude on the field Saturday is going to be McCord, because he's a proud guy, right? And he's going to want to show that was crazy up at Pitt, and that's not him. I guess for you guys down at Pitt. And so I expect he'll have a better game this week than he did at Pittsburgh.
I mean, 3 pick sixes was just insane. A couple picks, here and there, and 1 pick six, but the 3 in the first half was just watching that game was nuts.
Yeah, but you can imagine you can imagine how he's going to react, right? Like,
yeah,
you don't get to be a starting quarterback at
loss.
this level. Yeah, you don't get to this level without having a real fire and a commitment. And everyone knows that, right? I mean, everyone knows he's going to play well Saturday.
Yeah, but back in the Stanford game, he said after the loss he didn't sleep really kind of the next 2 games or 2 days, excuse me, just watching all the film. Looking at the ACC stats, Virginia Tech has a top 2 passing defense. So I guess, do you foresee them kind of trying to copy that Pitt method over, not limiting those deep shots, kind of playing more man-to-man coverage?
Well, Narduzzi always does that. He always plays man free. He's always playing tight. Tech mixes it up. First of all, they don't tell me, and coaches don't give their game plan. Tech plays some zone. It would not surprise me if they played less of it this week and mix things up a little bit. What the Hokies have been able to do is, if you look at the numbers, they get a lot of sacks, but their defensive front, and they're able to get great pass rush while dropping 7. And I think that's going to be the key. So I don't know that, and again, we'll see how it goes. I don't know that their game plan necessarily would be they have to blitz to put pressure on the quarterback. That there'll be some of that, but I don't know that. I think they feel pretty good about their front 4 being able to get pressure and not give up the big play, because our league is so balanced, right? And it seems like every game is decided on explosive plays and turnovers too. But if you don't give up big plays and you make the other team snap it 14 times to score, your odds in our league of winning seem to be pretty good, right? And I think that if you get caught man to man and you're blitzing and McCord's throwing the ball all over the field to one-on-one guys, you can give up a big play. I think we'll see how it plays out, but I don't think that they'll play what Pitt does. I mean, that's not what the Hokies do. It is what Narduzzi does. A lot of the man-to-man and come after you. That hasn't been Tech's MO so far this year.
This will be the Hokies' first time back at the Dome since 2016. Do you think the team's going to be maybe not nervous necessarily, but kind of a different atmosphere? Do you think the team will be able to handle that?
Well, yeah, I mean, these guys were in, let's see, what, sixth grade the last time. Uh, I haven't done a game at the Dome since like 2002, and my take on it is what always made the Dome tough for the visiting team to play was Don McNabb and Dwight Freeney and those guys. It wasn't necessarily, uh, the student section intimidating the team. Coach Mack and Coach P had great players that were really hard to block and great running backs who were hard to tackle. And so I don't know that the Dome itself, but I think SU is the issue. I think that the team, after what they did at Pitt, with a hunger to bounce back, I think that's the concern. And if SU wins the game, it's going to be because of the way the dudes play more so than the facility. You know, maybe I'm just old, but the stadium doesn't usually win the game. It's the guys in the helmets, and that's the way I look at it. I think the key to the game is going to be turnovers and explosives for sure, but how the Hokies handle McCord, and then the physical situation with some of the Tech key players, particularly Tootin.
Well, when you look at the schedule of the game, it's a perfect weekend. You're a W8ER alum coming back. It's alumni weekend on campus. Just what was your favorite memory from back in the day at W8ER? What was your favorite kind of game that you called at W8ER?
Oh, at the Dome or at Fagan's?
Well, Fagan's I think speaks for itself with Flip. But what's your favorite game that you called in the Dome?
It's funny. The favorite games at the Dome usually ended up at Fagan's post game. I was there when the Nebraska game, which was really incredible. When Nebraska was #1 and SU won the game, that was huge, and especially for Coach Mack, who, by the way, is finally getting honored. I'm so excited for him and his family, and they're going to honor him later here in November. So congrats to the McPhersons. Holy cow, so many amazing games. The Nebraska game, I think, probably stands out to me. I was at the West Virginia game where they had to go and get the 2-point conversion at the end to remain undefeated. But in terms of the growth of the program, if you can imagine, SU played at Nebraska and had lost 63-7. And Tom Osborne was this Hall of Fame coach, and Nebraska was loaded and #1, and they're coming to the Dome. So basically, Nebraska coming to the Dome would be like what Alabama would be now, or Georgia. You know what I'm saying? Like a team
Yeah.
that had won 50 of its last 52 games and 2 natties, and boy, off the opening kickoff, SU was the more physical team, and by the middle of the second quarter, you could tell Nebraska didn't want any part of SU that day. And I think that really helped Coach Mack, right? It showed that SU could win in football at a really high level. And that Nebraska win, not only did it help that team that year, but I think if you look at the players who then signed in the recruiting class after that, um, that was a big changer. And it's funny, that game wasn't on national television. It wasn't like the big game because I don't know what the line on the game would have been, like maybe Nebraska by 28 or something like that. And so that would be it. Beating #1, a very good Nebraska team at the height of Husker power in college football. And especially, the year before. The year before they went out to Lincoln and got beat 63-7. And so that's an example, right? Like that's exactly how I expect McCord to come back this week, right? When you have a bad game and you're a proud guy and you've worked really hard to be successful like he has, you're going to be it's not the biggest game he's ever played, but to him, it's going to feel like I have to play great this week. And that's what's weird, catching SU coming off what just happened in Pittsburgh. You'd almost rather they had won the game, and they're overconfident and feeling good about themselves. I kind of sense the opposite. You guys tell me if I'm wrong, but I sense the Hokies are going to see a really hungry team.
No, I agree. I mean, honestly, last week's Pittsburgh game felt like the Virginia Tech game of last year when Syracuse got embarrassed on the Thursday night game down at Lane Stadium. You mentioned Fagans. There's always great stories at Fagans. Flip night obviously is the the tradition. I started 2 of 14 though to start the year at Flip night, so I'm not. I'm in a bad rut right now. I don't know if you were more successful when you were on campus.
Well, I guess the statute of limitations has expired, right?
Yeah, probably.
I knew the bartender.
Oh, so you
There
never
you
did
go.
you even have to flip, or did you always got it
No.
right?
Well, I always got it right, Jordan. I had, I had my very first legal beer at Fagans,
There you go.
and it was a Guinness. And I sat at the bar, and I vividly remember the spot. The last time I was at SU, I went back there and tried to recreate it. And it's funny. It looks the same. I know that was a long time ago, before you guys were walking around, uh, but it kind of looks the same, and the vibe is the same there. And I assure you, we will hit it Friday.
Well, something that doesn't look the same as the dome. I don't know if you've seen the new blue seats. Are you a fan of the blue seats, or you want them back to the metal bleachers?
I've not seen it in person, so let me walk through it, and I'll get a feel for it. But it's a great place, um, for everything: lacrosse, hoops, women's hoops too now, right? And obviously
Yeah.
football, and it's a lot of memories there. I think Pete Salas still runs the dome, which is crazy, and I think
Yep.
there's one of the more underrated guys in the history of WAER too, because back in the day, Pete would always ask AER guys to come in and do PA for this or work on this broadcast for that. Back when this was pre-ACC Network, where like everything was
Yeah.
kind of you're trying to get stuff together, and we did stuff at the dome, and Pete's been there the whole time, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, and I'm glad that we're playing. The ACC, and who knows what our league will look like. But whatever league we are in and SU is in, I hope we're together, because I like the games. It was in November of 1964, which actually predates me, just so you know. But November of '64 is when they started playing, and that was the first game in the series. It was at Archbold before the Dome, and I vividly remember when I was at school at SU interviewing Coach Mack for his pregame interview before the Virginia Tech Syracuse game, I guess in '85, and somewhere there's probably a cassette, probably up there at the station. I asked Mac about it, and he said someday we could be in a conference, and that would be a good conference for us. And his take on it was really interesting. Uh, he felt in the mid '80s that it would be good to have Virginia Tech and Syracuse in the conference together, because he felt like SU needed to recruit the DC, Northern Virginia, Maryland area, and Maryland didn't want to play. And he thought it would be good if you're playing Virginia Tech. It's a kind of a DC centric team, and then we ended up in the Big East together. And Mac was right. I looked, what there's 6 players on the SU roster from Virginia. So,
Yep.
30 something years ago, 40 something years ago, Coach Mack was right, because and from Coach Boeheim and now Coach Autry, right? Like the whole DMV is huge, and some of the best SU players ever are Baltimore, Washington kids, and same with Tech. Some of our best players are from the greater DC area. So Mac was somewhat prophetic in the '80s, saying that we would be in a conference together, and now we're in 2 different conferences together.
Yeah, Jim Boeheim and Adrian Autry should be thanking him. Half the Syracuse players every year on the basketball team are DMV, and now Fran Brown going back to New Jersey to get some players in the future. It's going to be great to have you back up on campus, Bill. Thank you again for taking the time earlier in the week.
You bet.